Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we're here with Dario Nardi again, and we're here to discuss the coaching insights you can use after receiving your EEG brain scan results. As you guys know, Dario Nardi, he scans people's brains to figure out their subtype in the type community. And so we're here to discuss the practical applications of that using my brain results as an example. Before we get to it, I'd like to just do a little promo of Dario Nardi's event coming up on October 20th to 26th. And so he is going to be having a series of workshops throughout an entire week where you learn about Jungian concepts or things related to personal growth, such as active imagination, human connection workshops, and etc. And so he's also doing brain scans there. So it's super relevant to today's topic. And yeah, I'm also going to be there too. So if you want to meet me in person or just like learn from us in the flesh, definitely come visit Dario's workshop. It's amazing. And he's amazing. So what can I say? All right. So here is the beginning of my report. And as we scroll down, you see how it looks like. Yeah. And there's even an applications and benefits section to make it super easy for you.
Yeah, there's, you know, it's almost like when people come in for the first time in a company and they take the MBTI assessment, something like that, and they get a type code. You know, the MBTI is not 100% valid or reliable. I mean, nothing can be, especially since it's trying to get at something that's invisible or abstract. Well, so fortunately, we have the brain imaging data. So it really is something that is concrete. But there still is a question, as there is with MBTI or DISC or anything else like that. Like, what are the applications? Like, why? What do you do with this information? What do you do with your type code? So there's a lot of reasons I've heard over, I don't know, 17 years, something like that, 18 years. And here are the things that come in. One of them, of course, is to clarify the person's type. Like, what is my best fit type? And the brain imaging can't tell you that directly, but by learning your subtype and getting information, more information, I found people actually really do. Like, they just get enough more to know, okay, this then is going to be my best fit type as opposed to this other one. So it's more about informing you. A lot of times people have job related stuff. They're thinking of making a career change. They want to improve their workflow. Then there's this idea of strength, like the Strengths Finder, that you work from your strengths. I think it's really valid, this concept of secondary strengths. It's sort of like how Joel and Antonia at Personality Hacker talk about working on your Copilot, like just remembering to use it even. You don't even need to grow it a lot. You just need to remember to use it. And so the secondary strengths are something that are pinpointed in the results, the brain imaging results, and you just need to give more time in your life because not everything in your brain works at the same speed. And then weaknesses, not that you're going to develop your weaknesses, but to be aware of them and cover for them. Improving teamwork. So if you and several other people do it, or close relationships, you and a loved one, a friend, your partner, spouse, do this, then you also have this great chance to share and compare. I just had a couple in Sweden recently, INTJ and INFP, and the similarities and differences are really cool to see. And it's very concrete, and in a way, just like with type, is it's giving us something objective. This is also giving us something objective that says, like, yeah, it's not that my partner is trying to deliberately irritate me. It's because their brain works this way or that way. Because we talk about the subtypes, we can also talk about things for personal growth. So being more assertive, creative, disciplined, empathic, those are all things that show up in the brain. And I would say one other thing is occasionally people come in and they have a diagnosis like ADD or ADHD, or they had like some brain injury, concussion or something in the past. This doesn't diagnose or treat disease, but still it can provide useful information. And some people just come because they're curious and they want to know, and everybody else is doing it. So, so those are some typical application areas.
And one of the areas, like you mentioned, is a career change. And so oftentimes you might learn, oh, your subtype is a creative subtype, and you realize you've been working at a normalizing job your whole life, and that a 9 to 5 job may not be one that you enjoy immensely, or maybe you do it in your own way as a creative subtype and you learn to enjoy it that way. In any case, it actually gives you some insight as to what you might feel more natural in, or how you can tailor what's existing to suit you better. And so there's so many applications to this. Dario Nardi is also training people to interpret these reports. And so I'm also able to read through these as well through Dario's training to help people interpret their results.
Yeah, absolutely. That tools class. Yeah.
Mhm.
And yeah, so the first part of 4 major parts is the engagement record, which just shows like what was your brain doing in a sort of broad strokes as you did each task. So on the right-hand side, listing down vertically, we started off usually in everything random, a little bit of random chat because it's a social thing, meditation, math problems, sorting values, and so on. Then the bars are colored, and and they have a length to them. So the length, short, medium, long, is the amount of engagement. Some people just naturally have a very high baseline or very low baseline, but relatively speaking, we can see certain things are more or less engaging. And for coaching, one of the first things we can ask is, which activities were generally more engaging for the person? Or were they like generally very under challenged, or maybe like hyper engaged, just from excitement? Generally speaking, people who like the math problems also and are engaged with those, also are engaged with the 3D like problem solving, geometry kind of stuff. And then people who like the more humanistic things, like the creative wordplay or the values sort. Let's say the values sort also respond in the same way to analyzing like what's going on in a picture with people in it. And then the creativity stuff tends to also go together, and we see patterns like that. So that can help guide like wherever the person is more engaged, are they actually doing that in their job? And sometimes the engagement is high with something like math because the person's like trying really hard. And that doesn't mean that they love it. They just have like a desire to do well, and that's fine. Then there's colors, and one of the things we can look at with the colors in terms of coaching, people are often curious about, is stress. So it's like, how am I managing stress? And we have 2, or depending on the setup, 3 de-stressing activities. A couple of minutes of meditation, a couple of minutes of listening to like gentle, relaxing music. And then if there's a ball toss activity, then there's this physical activity that for some types, especially the sensing perceiving types like ESTP and ISFP, that they find those relaxing, unlike everybody else. And as part of that, it's not just the length of the bars, it's actually the color that we want to see, this yellow color. That when we see these different colors, most people are going to show a lot of blue and green, that's typical. But where does the yellow, orange, and red show up? The yellow is often these de-stressing activities, but is generally related to sensing and feeling. So an ESFJ who comes in to the lab is quite likely to have quite a bit of yellow, even when they're not doing a relaxation activity, because they're more connected to their body and their emotions than, say, an INTP who might show very little yellow. But we want to find like some spot where the person could relax their brain and connect with their body. Like that's sort of an ideal kind of thing. And then we also want to know, where are the spikes? And in this view here, you can't really see them so well like on screen. But when we actually have it like at 100% or more magnification, we can see where there are red spikes or there are yellow. And I find it very interesting with Joyce that you show yellow not with the relaxation activities like listening to music, but when you're actually more passionate or interested about something, like when you were giving your expert talk. And that's actually when you showed yellow. So that's really that's where that, not the sensing, but the feeling element is coming in, like the passion with that. So we'd want to see like where, especially if it's an eyes open active activity, where is the person passionate about something? And in red and orange, those is like challenge zone stuff. So that's when it's like definitely saying the person feels challenged at that point in problem solving. And are they getting to like actually use their brain? Like in what kind of activities? And that really points, then it connects to tasks that people are doing, analytical tasks, people-related tasks, and so on in everyday life. So that's like a basic way. It's like gathering in for some information and pointing to, I would say a lot of it is like not life coaching, but workplace coaching. It like work role and maybe even a little bit of career coaching.
Cool. And so I'm going to make my way down this report.
Yeah, so this section here, I think, is really, it starts off with the colorful part, and your result is very colorful and not the statistical norm. I mean, it's fairly relative to the rest of the population. Among INFJs, this is fairly, not uncommon result. I don't know what exactly it would be, maybe 40%, something like that. But for most people, they don't show such a busy kind of pattern. And there's actually three things here. So when it comes to coaching, we want to look at the big one, which is just the combine, all the information combined. And that's giving the person subtype, which for you is harmonizing with maybe some creative second. And it's just like a pretty clear harmonizing result. So harmonizing INFJ, with a little bit of creative INFJ, and then there's some basic things that we want to know that are not really clinical per se, but are against a baseline. So for example, at the very top, the lines right here underneath that little triangle of the nose, you see like a black line that's there between FP1 and FP2. Anybody who's over 25 years old, you want to have like a gray or a black line there, or even a red one. Like you want to have a line there because that's the two executive regions of the brain coordinating with each other. And that's just really important to see. Does the person have good executive function? In type terms, really is their perceiving function, the right prefrontal cortex, and their judging function, the left prefrontal cortex, are they working well together, harmonizing together? And we see that. So this is a good, just like a little check along the way. It's sort of like, I guess, a check of type development. We also see something that's not just the big one here, but the two small ones. And in particular, going down to the fast challenge mode. And we want to know, like, when the person is challenged, so when they're really in that red zone, that orange zone, as they do the different tasks, beta waves and gamma waves, as we call them, what kind of result is the person showing? And in this case here, it's not, for many people, it's actually different than their combined mode. Not like radically different, but it's different, clearly. Yours is not so different. But it is a little bit more towards maybe the back of the brain. I don't know, it's even hard to say that. Yours is pretty much the same, but for a lot of people, it's different. And this is important to know if a person's unhappy or like feels sort of stuck in what they're doing in terms of like not feeling challenged enough, or they want to see like, yeah, what does my type development look like? Is they're going to see that in the fast challenge mode. And yours happens to be aligned, all of your three here, but for many people, the three are not aligned. They're not similar. And we get a picture of long-term and past self in the automatic mode, because it's automatic because you've been doing it for like years and decades. Then the combined mode is everything. It's sort of like what you've been doing the past 2 years. And then the challenge mode is like when you feel pushed and where you could go in the future. One of the things that's cool looking at this in the challenge mode is like it's fairly similar, but there are a few differences in terms of like the regions that are most active, and there's a little bit more activity towards the back of the brain, and yet also strong executive function in the front. So it's a red line rather than a black line. So it's indicating that, yeah, you know, when you feel challenged, you're in a little bit more of like a reflective mode, still harmonizing, but a little bit more reflective. You also show quite a bit of this verbal connection here with like this region of the brain, the left side, by the left ear, and connecting that with another region diagonally. It's up here, F4, which is about abstract use of language and concepts and categories. And then they too connect in like a triangle down to PZ, which is this region that's visual spatial and like visualizing mental models and how things work. So those are really nice, like a little triangle to have connected there. It's like about speaking and talking about abstract mental models in a way that has like a functional use, because PZ is often visual spatial, is about the functional use of something. So, I mean, that's what you end up talking about with type dynamics, not just type and like sort of the letters or the definitions, but like the actual applications of type, because the PZ is always about applications. And you've got a very strong red T6 down there in both views. Of course, T6 is very much associated with intuiting in general, particularly introverted intuiting. For the NE folks also, it's often connected. So we just see some things here, and the main takeaway is this broad subtype, which we're going to get to in the next part, and knowing, like, is the person's life set up in a way, as you mentioned, like, are you actually doing your subtype? And if you are and you don't like what you're doing, like say a person gets normalizing result, and they're like, yeah, I don't like normalizing. I'm like, okay, we need to look at the other three and get suggestions for that.
Yeah, and if you guys want to see a more detailed rundown of this brain report, Dario actually did another video with me going over this in detail, so I'll link that below as well. Here, we're on to the top 3 brain networks.
Yeah, so this is like really, this is like when people go from learning about the 4-letter code, like, oh, am I E or I as a preference, sort of saying like right or left-handed, to actually seeing like and learning about the functions. So in here, we talk about the top 3 ways that your brain works network-wise. And the first way is, I think, the starburst. And the second, so the strong starburst there is this creativity. The multi-diamond bias is where the harmonizing comes in. So creative and harmonizing really come in together this way. And then as the third one, we have a little bit further down there, is the center back bias, which is more contemplative and reflective, this gathering information mode, very typical of IN types and just even introverts in general. So this is like more digging under the hood, and instead of looking at the sort of like abstract view, it's telling the person who's the coach, like, these are the 3 modes and like networks in the person's brain that are really important in their work. Are they actually being able to use these networks, and how are they using them? And you can ask simple questions at the beginning, like, okay, you show this like starburst pattern. How is this showing up for you in your life? And that gives a person like a language and a visual and permission to simply talk about that, and to understand like, oh yeah, it's like this is how my brain works. And along with some downsides, people might think, oh yeah, creative subtype is awesome. Well, I mean, it can be, but it has downsides too. All of them have downsides. Struggling to focus, maybe wasting time and energy responding to new or exciting things when it's not needed. So just helping a person become aware of what is the downside of each of their strengths. This is very different from the sort of standard strength finding approach, which is like a list of behaviors or traits, and then usually the weaknesses are things you don't do. But like, I'm not really great at team sports. I can play defense maybe, but like beyond that, it's like, oh yeah, that's not a strength. But like extracting concepts from books, like I'm really good at that. So that's one way to look at it. But this is a different approach. It's a little bit more like type saying that there's like a flip side or like a dark side to your strengths when they're overused, and just being aware of those. So asking a person like, okay, when are times when you've seen a downside from this? And then what are ways in your life you can reduce the downside to compensate for it? And that's like in a discussion phase. It's not so much like the nitty gritty coaching advice yet. It's just like a general like opening up and discussion.
Just like you can find the one-sidedness of your Myers-Briggs type, like the way that you're overdoing some of your strengths and not balancing yourself in certain ways, in a way, you can also have that discussion with your brain wiring or around the topic of your EEG results too. And what things are you overdoing, underdoing, and what are the secondary strengths that you could use more? So I think that that's wonderful. These areas, it's really interesting to see what specific aspects of your brain light up, like what specific region, and also seeing the overall pattern and having a discussion around that can be very fruitful.
And I can give you a nice example before we go on to the work habits, just the one example. So an INTP came in, and this was some years ago. And he came out as the normalizing subtype, very much so. And of course, he was a little bit surprised because he considered himself a creative person. And I said, well, there's a couple of ways to be creative. And one way is the starburst pattern. But the other way is to have favorite regions that you use that are specifically dedicated or like really support being creative. Like this region here, the sort of towards the center, frontal center region, that's very much involved. We've seen in the research out there on hypothesis generation and testing, making inferences, like that was very well connected for him. And it showed up in practical things, like people who have the starburst pattern generally don't need aids, like writing things down or like visualization, diagramming aids or whatever it is, because like the brain is doing all of it in the person's head. Whereas he definitely, when he did his intuitive brainstorming and this and that, he was not comfortable brainstorming just ad hoc. Like he really wanted a piece of paper in front of him to do mind mapping and like make it structured and more concrete. And so I think that's one way. Sometimes when people feel like, oh, they have this idea, they come in as like creativity means this, or normalizing means I'm a normie or NPC or whatever it is. I'm like, no. Like there's different ways to go about being creative and like what works for you. So somebody who comes in who feels that they're not sure, like, how can I be more creative or how can I be more assertive or more empathic? Like there are different ways to look at that. Empathic doesn't mean harmonizing. Harmonizing helps a lot with that as a subtype. But there are also regions of the brain that support empathy. And so we can point to those regions. And as we get down towards the very end of the report, we'll see like specific examples of like how to encourage particular regions and behaviors.
Then I will scroll down to work habits. And just to let you know, Dario made a few tweaks to the reports. And so there's a slightly different result, just like by a few points.
Yeah. And in fact, Adrian and Darren and I are talking now about revising this section to make it more, it'll still be like 1 or 2 pie charts, but making it more useful, like 4 sections or whatever, rather than 2, that are a little bit more around like stuff that's specifically in the workplace. Like you can really tell from the brain the difference between leadership skills, management skills, and then like support specialist skills. And then like how would those show up in the pie chart if we did it that way? So we're really trying to make it something more practical for people in the workplace. Like it's fine to see this now, but a lot of people end up, I think because of the way our world works today, that most people are not just out there like as bricklayers, or they're not indoors just sitting with people and never touching technology. That we have to do people and tech stuff all the time. That we have to deal with numbers and concrete information and details, as well as doing abstract things. So there's a lot of, we just like making it more useful with people. Some people do show big differences here, and that's good to know. But a lot of people, it's like, oh yeah, they're like really close. And in yours, really close, because you also have that starburst pattern. So the creative folks in particular, and to some extent, other folks, they end up really close, and they're like, oh, this doesn't help because it means I'm very flexible, but it also means to be satisfied, I need to be doing multiple things. And so that's like a little bit of a coaching piece that we want to work on more. Just this one particular section here of the report is, and the great thing is once you do this, like yours will be updated in the future, like automatically updated. Everything we add or tweak gets automatically updated. And then this is the executive style. And this is the fun part to see. And you showed evidence of both creative and harmonizing, but I think they rank closely, but harmonizing is stronger. And so it gives some stuff that's like, here are characteristics that you likely share. So this is a little bit like reading like a type profile, except it's subtype. And for people who don't know type at all, this is also the entree into type, is actually talking about their subtype first. And this also means that regardless of your type, if you have harmonizing subtype, you're going to have things in common, probably a bit with NF folks, or people with the feeling preference. That like INTJ, and she came in and had to really no surprise to either of us, a harmonizing subtype. And those folks just tend to have a little bit better like relational skills, interpersonal skills, more of a feeling preference. She debated for a while, am I INFJ or INTJ? No, she's definitely INTJ. She's just got a better set of skills when it comes to working with people. So this is like the stuff that we want to know. That's a little bit like reading a type portrait, but it's a subtype portrait. And then the next section after this shows like advice to follow to get the most out of your subtype. Like, what are some really good needs? Active listening. This is in part its advice. Like, if you don't do this, then this is a strength for you. Like, so do it. And given your reflective nature, engage in active listening as a way to validate your own and others' feelings and needs. Like, this is sort of reminding you of, in some of these, or reminders of things to work off of your strengths. And then there are other things like use grounding techniques because of the 4 subtypes. The creative and harmonizing in particular are not as grounded as the other 2. Normalizing is the most grounded. So what are your grounding techniques, like a daily habits for your body and for your mind to stay present, to stay relaxed? Like, what are those? And make sure you have those in your life. So very, very specific things. And it's kind of advice that complements your type. And because, there are some, I think, for example, with INFJ, there are some INFJs that would really, really benefit. Like, they're particularly like nervous, or really feel that they're bombarded all the time with other people's energy, and they're like, well, what are some ways I can deal with it? And then there's some other INFJs who are more tough, and this comes up even in the dimension that's talked about out in type there, like the tough and assertive versions of a type versus the more like sensitive and turbulent version of a type. And so that's a grounding in particular is good to see for any person that is the more like sensitive and turbulent version. So these are other pieces of advice. And you might wonder, like, okay, so they're grounding techniques, but he says I should do more, but what are those? Well, that's where the coach comes in. That's where someone like Joyce, where you come in, that is going to be like, here are some grounding techniques. Like, let's locate something that works well for you. Let's talk about your relationships at work. Like, which ones are the meaningful ones for you, and how can you either have more of those or really like lean into those and appreciate them. And then there are other like sort of issues, that other things that come up. So one of them which we just scrolled past is the seeking sort of a safety or help when feeling unsafe. This, both normalizing and harmonizing, can have times when they feel insecure or unsafe compared to the creative or dominant. So dominant INFJs rarely have this feeling of lack of safety. And then the creative INFJ is very much like risk-taking relative to other INFJs. But for those who are harmonizing, it's important to recognize it's like, oh, when are there times? And it's for normalizing too. When we feel a little bit like unsafe or a little bit hurt or something like that, just like it's okay to ask for help. And you have those relationship skills. So it's like, where is it good to ask for help? So every one of the subtypes has a little bit different advice, and that's layered in with the type related advice.
Yeah. The creative and dominant are the more extroverted brain subtypes, even if you're an introvert. And so they're a little bit more proactive in that
Yeah.
zone of taking initiative. Whereas if you're harmonizing and normalizing, and especially if you're an introvert on top, it's going to be double inaction or double not sticking up for yourself when you need that sticking up for yourself on top of like
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
almost like your
Yeah.
brain wiring, like it can enhance the natural not seeking out help that even your Myers-Briggs type has too.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah,
makes sense.
there's this kind of advice that's in the report, but it's really great to work with the coach to actually like explore how we can implement that. This section here is more information. It talks about the other subtypes, and it's useful to do because sometimes the second subtype, like there's a second ranked one that is really close to the first and really important to know. Or the challenge mode is a very different subtype than like your combined picture. So it's like maybe a person is normally harmonizing, but when they're in this challenge mode, they actually become dominant, which would be like a really striking contrast. So it would be useful to see, okay, if they want to move more in that direction and really challenge themselves, then they can read more about confident expediting, which is what the dominant subtype does, and then meeting those needs. So and this is the kind of thing like the report doesn't tell you what second ranked or last or whatever it is. So you want to work with someone who's knowledgeable, who can look at it and say like, okay, this is your second ranked one, or this is your challenge mode, or notice how in your automatic mode, you're very normalizing. A lot of people are normalizing in the automatic mode. So they go through life and they're like, yeah, I think of myself as harmonizing or creative or dominant. But the whole underlying the way they were raised and like what's going on automatically in the background is actually very normalizing, which makes sense because most of us have like regular jobs and normal responsibilities and at least semi-normal childhoods, or typical, we'll say typical childhoods. Then school systems that encourage conformity and like getting through society. So it's important to see these different sides of yourself, and when they're relevant, to ask like, what is some advice in each space?
Yeah, so you can be a mix of subtypes, so that's always important to factor in a little bit as well too. As well as learning the ones that might be close to you. Like if your partner is a creative or dominant, but you're not those, you can also look this up too to see a little bit about them. And so we're at the 6 best developed skills.
Yep, and this is the part that it's funny, it's at the end of the report, but it's the part people often want to see the first or second after the subtype. And these are your top 6. Sometimes there's some others like number 7 and 8 that are really important to look at too. They're like all very close, bunched up together. Or maybe the person just wants to focus on the top 3. But even just looking at the top 1, so this was your region of your brain that corresponds to sensor T6. So this is the right rear temporal region that was the most connected for you. Insightful futurists. So really, really, I think in many ways we can say with this particular INFJ, Joyce, that this is like really, really like fits well with our ideas of like the standard INFJ. That there are these elements here like noticing patterns, seeing how events connect, seeing what will come next in life, interpreting faces or images within a group or context, with a sense of what's going on, but finding it hard to articulate, noticing symbols and their hidden meanings. Sounds a lot like NI. Not connected really well to any verbal regions usually. So in the workplace, then it's like, it's giving, in this case, it's not, it has some advice mixed in. So easily notice patterns in visual data. Okay, so are you working with visual data? Like, what are those? Tend to think about the future and what opportunities or challenges are coming next. Is that part of your job, or how can that be part of your job? Then questions that are good for either that you ask or good for you to ask when you're on a team, or just like you have a project in front of you, like what is that going to look like? And the other suggestions are well. So like respond well to, all of them have these like little lead-ins: timelines, symbols, icons, totems, bulletin boards, ability to represent everything all at once in some kind of like symbolic and visual way. Like, and if a person is not doing that, like they're like, I don't really have any bulletin board, or I don't have a little space. Like I know one INFJ, and he was thinking about what kind of future he wanted. So he created a little, I want to say like altar almost for himself, but not in a religious sense. It really was a collage that he made of that. It was very like, yeah, it included some like spiritual things, but it also included stuff from magazines and stuff from the internet and memes and all of that. And this collage was something that was there every day. That was something very visual that had like symbols and icons and inspirational images that represented where he wanted to be in the future. And that was a really nice way of speaking to his brain, his right brain. And then it's like, do you work in a workplace that helps people develop their potential for the future? And those are all, you know, this dovetails very nicely with type in this particular case, but there are INFJs where this is going to be further down, and they've had other skills that they've had to develop. Maybe as a therapist, they have a lot of listening skills, or as you know, like doing presentations and talking with people, they have a lot of like speaking skills or language analysis skills, like whatever it is. Dominant subtype is going to be very goal focused. So what is that going to look like for them? And wanting to see like, how does this show up? And if it's not showing up as much as you'd like in your work or your life, like how can you bring these in?
Mm. Yeah, and then there are all these other developed skills that you can also factor in too. Mm,
Yeah, absolutely. And we have toyed with showing people their worst developed skills. But weirdly, for a lot of people, those are actually the same skills, and they're ones that are related to action and sensation, not so much in a type sense as in like a practical everyday sense, that most people today are not doing farming or manual labor, or they're not warriors, so they're not doing like gymnastics or martial arts, although sometimes people have a hobby with that, and we see that will show up. And so the weird thing is that there's an element not just of job but of culture, and so where do your results fit when we talk about subtype? Then sort of like, where do your results fit relative to other people of your type? But also it looks and sort of gives us a story about where does it fit within your culture. And so far, I mean, I can comment about like North American culture, specifically the United States, and about European culture, specifically like UK, France, Denmark, Norway, Germany, Italy, and also Japan and Singapore. You know, so that we have in India. So like, where does it fit? And even more so within your career space, you know, as a coach, or as in your case, or as an artist. This is particularly interesting for someone like a type like ENFJ. So ENFJ maybe is an artistic profession, or what they view as artistic or creative, like a musician. And then they're really surprised to discover, in a way, they come out normalizing. I'm not really surprised at all, personally, because the couple of ENFJs that I've known who are in music, singing, playing piano, other musical instruments, wow, they know so much of the technical ins and outs. Like they read music, or they hear pitch super well. They really follow all of these like standard and beautiful ways of doing things, like classical music and knowing like the models for music and all of that. Very, very different than some other ways that people play music, which could be very like jazz, ad hoc playing. Yeah, I just use chords. I mean, this is how I play. If I don't play the piano very well, but when I do, it's like, yeah, I just play chords and I sing along with it to the chords, and I'm the creative subtype. So I just like do everything in the moment, improvisationally. Every time I play is different. I don't know a lot about theory. I don't keep time to a metronome. Or if I am keeping time, it's something very strange, like 5/8 time or whatever it is. And that's a very different style of doing it. And it's really funny because I had an ENFJ, I had a couple of ENFJs over the summer come in who were creative subtype. And I'm like, oh, that's so exciting, because we had the only creative one I had in the database up until a year ago was an actress. And I know from taking acting classes, it's like acting, even when it's rehearsed, you just have to manage like so many different things at the same time, especially acting for film and television. And so I had this gal come in and I'm like, okay, what are you doing now? And she like wrote in her thing of what she's doing, which was a bit of like, you know, like humanistic, like human resource, helping people and so on. And I'm like, you came out creative subtype. And then she's like, oh, I should have mentioned, like, that's not surprising, but I was actually an actress like for many years. And I'm like, okay, because your brain is still organized as if you're an actress, just FYI. So that really was exciting to see that who we are in the past, even though in a way she felt she had given that up, her brain did not give that up. And that was still very much a potential and something she could apply.
Absolutely. So even if you have an odd result, or a seemingly on the surface odd result for your profession, it actually makes sense when you start to think through it. And so I think that that's wonderful. It shows how many different brain types can actually be suited for a certain role too. And yeah, so if you want some self-knowledge, additional self-knowledge, in the form of seeing how your brain is wired, or if you're just curious about your mind's wiring, what better way than to look directly? And so thank you, Dario, for coming out today.
Yeah.
And if you enjoyed today's session, you can always check out Dario's workshop coming out in Arizona in person.
Yes.
And he's doing brain scans then, and it's on discount right now. So until September 20th, you will be having a reduction in price if you attend. So I highly recommend it. You want to meet with Dario and see what your brain's all about. We're all geeks here. Like, if you're
Yes.
on this channel watching this video, you love understanding personality and psychology. If you want to look at these really cool scans to even get into the nitty-gritty of it, I think this is a great birthday present to yourself. It could be a year early birthday present. You're like, you know what? My birthday's in June of next year, but I'm going to give myself a really early birthday present. Then go check out Dario's workshop. You can attend one day, a series of days, or the whole week. We just love to see you there. And so, take care,
Absolutely.
everyone.
Thank you.